The evening should have been ordinary. I finished my shift at the library, organized a few returned books, and spent the last 10 minutes helping an elderly man print photographs of his grandchildren. While I was shutting down my computer, I glanced at the time and smiled to myself. My father and I had plans to meet for dinner, which was unusual enough to make me curious. He was not the type of man who scheduled serious conversations. Most of the important things in his life were discussed while fixing engines, drinking coffee, or driving somewhere without a destination. Earlier that week, he had called me during work and insisted that we meet. When I asked what was so important, he laughed and told me that some conversations were better face to face. The problem was that my father hated mysteries. That was one reason his silence worried me. By the time I reached the restaurant, he was already 20 minutes late. At first, I assumed work had delayed him. His repair shop stayed busy throughout the year, and customers often arrived at the worst possible moments. I ordered coffee and checked my phone while I waited. 20 minutes became 40. 40 became 60. My messages remained unread. When I finally called him, the phone went directly to voicemail. The uneasy feeling that had been sitting quietly in the back of my mind suddenly moved to the front. My father had raised me alone after my mother died. Because of that, I knew his habits better than most people knew their own family members. He was dependable in ways that almost felt old-fashioned. If he promised to be somewhere, he arrived early. If he changed plans, he called. Even when life became difficult, he never disappeared without explanation. I left the restaurant and drove straight to his repair shop. The building stood beside the highway exactly as it always had. The large garage doors were closed, and the sign above the entrance was dark. However, one detail immediately caught my attention. His truck was still parked outside. I walked around the property, checking every door and window. Nothing appeared damaged. Nothing appeared unusual. Yet the longer I looked, the stronger the feeling became that something was wrong. An hour later, a police officer arrived and completed a routine report. He remained polite throughout the conversation, but I could tell he believed there was probably a simple explanation. Adults occasionally left town without informing anyone. Adults occasionally needed space. My father was not one of those adults. I returned home shortly before midnight and spent most of the night staring at the ceiling. The following morning brought no answers. By lunchtime, I had called everyone I could think of: friends, customers, suppliers, former employees. Nobody had seen him since the previous evening. Around 2 o'clock, my phone rang. The caller was Nathan Reed. Nathan had been part of my life for so long that I sometimes forgot we were not actually related. He had known my parents before I was born. He attended birthdays, school events, graduation ceremonies, and family gatherings. After my mother passed away, he became one of the few people who consistently checked on us. When he heard what happened, he arrived at the repair shop within an hour. "I'll help however I can," he said. And for a while he did. He contacted Popo, organized information, and accompanied me during several conversations with police officers. Watching him move through the situation with such confidence felt reassuring. There are moments in life when people naturally look for stability, and Nathan seemed to provide exactly that. By the second day, my father's disappearance had become the town's biggest topic of conversation. Search teams checked nearby areas. Volunteers distributed photographs. Local businesses placed missing person notices in their windows. Despite all those efforts, nobody discovered anything useful. Late that afternoon, another person appeared at the repair shop. Adrian Cole. The sight of him should have made me feel better. Instead, it complicated everything. I had met Adrian 6 months earlier in the library. Unlike most people, he never tried to impress anyone. He worked as a red pilot, spent too much time studying maps, and possessed a frustrating habit of answering questions with only half the information a normal person would provide. The truth was that Adrian had always been difficult to read. Some days he seemed completely open. Other days it felt as though part of him remained locked behind a door that nobody could access. As our relationship grew, I occasionally noticed moments when he became distant after conversations about family, especially when my father was mentioned. Whenever I asked whether something was wrong, he always claimed it was nothing. At the time, I believed him. Looking back, I realize he was hiding something long before my father disappeared. When Adrian arrived at the repair shop, he looked exhausted. He asked questions about the investigation and listened carefully to every answer. Yet there was a tension in him that I could not explain. Several times I caught him staring toward the road, as if he expected someone to appear. I almost asked what was bothering him. I never got the chance. The next morning, the police called. A security camera from a business across the street had captured footage from the night my father disappeared. For the first time in 3 days, I felt genuine hope. Maybe we would finally learn what happened. Investigators escorted me into a viewing room and started the recording. The video showed customers coming and going. Throughout the evening, nothing appeared unusual until a familiar vehicle entered the parking lot. My stomach tightened immediately. I recognized it before the investigator even paused the footage. It belonged to Adrian. The recording showed him entering my father's workshop shortly before closing time. Then the 2 men disappeared inside. Nearly 30 minutes passed. No one else entered. No one else left. When another vehicle briefly blocked the camera's view, part of the recording became unusable. A minute later, Adrian's vehicle was gone. My father's truck remained exactly where it had been, and my father never appeared on camera again. The investigator looked at me carefully before speaking. "According to everything we have right now," he said, "Adrian Cole was the last known person to see your father." As I stared at the screen, another memory suddenly returned to me. 2 weeks earlier, I had walked into a cafe unexpectedly and seen my father and Adrian sitting together at a corner table. The conversation looked serious enough that neither of them noticed me. When I later asked my father about it, he dismissed the meeting as unimportant. Adrian did exactly the same thing. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now I realized they had both lied. And for the first time since my father's disappearance, I found myself wondering whether the man I was falling in love with had been hiding the truth from me all along. Before I share the rest of story, I need to know, where are you listening from? I would love to hear from you. For the rest of that day, I felt as though I were walking through a dream that no longer followed normal rules. Every memory involving Adrian suddenly looked different. Conversations that once felt honest now seemed incomplete. Moments I had considered meaningful now carried questions I could not answer. The most painful part was not the security footage itself. It was the realization that both Adrian and my father had hidden something from me. By the time I left the police station, I had only one goal. I wanted the truth. I called Adrian 3 times before he finally answered. His voice sounded tired. When I told him about the footage, he remained silent for several seconds. That silence angered me more than any explanation could have. "Tell me I'm wrong," I said. "Tell me there is a reason you never mentioned meeting my father." "I can explain it," he replied carefully. "Then explain it." "Not over the phone." I almost ended the call immediately. My father was missing. The police considered Adrian the last known person to see him. Yet somehow he still believed there was a right time and place for explanations. An hour later, we met at a small lakeside park on the edge of town. The moment I saw him, I knew he was carrying a burden much heavier than simple suspicion. His eyes looked exhausted, and there was a tension in his face that I had never seen before. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. "Why did you lie to me?" Adrian looked down at the ground. Then he surprised me. "I didn't lie about the meeting," he said quietly. "I lied about why it happened." I stared at him. "What does that even mean?" He took a slow breath. "Your father contacted me first." That answer only deepened the mystery. According to Adrian, my father had arranged several private meetings during the previous 2 months. None of those meetings involved business. None involved family introductions or relationship concerns. Instead, my father had been asking questions. Questions about Adrian's family, questions about his childhood, questions about events that happened years before I met him. The explanation made no sense. Why would my father investigate Adrian? And why would Adrian hide it? When I demanded answers, he shook his head. "I can't tell you everything yet." The frustration I felt was almost unbearable. "People keep saying that," I snapped. "The police don't have answers. My father disappeared, and now you're standing here telling me there are secrets you're still protecting." His expression changed. For the first time, he looked genuinely guilty. Not guilty of a crime, guilty of something else, something personal. Before either of us could continue, his phone rang. He checked the screen and immediately ended the call. That detail caught my attention. Who was that? No one important. The answer came too quickly. I had spent enough time around people to recognize avoidance when I heard it. At that moment, a difficult realization began forming in my mind. Maybe Adrian was not responsible for my father's disappearance, but he was definitely hiding something. The following days only made the situation worse. The police continued their investigation, but progress remained painfully slow. At the same time, strange things began happening around me. One evening, I returned to my apartment and discovered fresh scratches around the lock on my front door. They looked recent, as if someone had tried to force it open. The building manager claimed it was probably old damage. I knew better. 2 days later, I found someone had searched through the storage compartment attached to my car. Nothing valuable was taken, yet several items had clearly been moved. The incidents were too specific to ignore. For the first time, I started wondering whether my father's disappearance and these strange events were connected. The answer arrived sooner than expected. 3 nights later, I left the library after closing and began walking toward my car. The parking lot was nearly empty. Halfway there, I noticed movement near the far end of the street. A dark vehicle sat parked beneath a broken streetlight. At first, I thought nothing of it. Then I realized I had seen the same vehicle before, outside my apartment, near the repair shop. Across the street from the police station, a cold feeling moved through my chest. I stopped walking. The vehicle remained perfectly still. Then a second car suddenly entered the parking lot from the opposite direction. The driver stepped out. Adrian, I watched him walk directly toward the dark vehicle. For one terrible second, I thought my worst fears had been confirmed. Maybe they were working together. Maybe everything had been a lie. Then the vehicle sped away. Adrian immediately took out his phone and photographed the license plate before it disappeared around the corner. I stood there in confusion. "What was that?" I asked when he reached me. His jaw tightened. "The same car that's been following you for almost 2 weeks." I felt my stomach drop. He showed me photographs stored on his phone. There were dozens. The vehicle outside my apartment. The vehicle near my workplace. The vehicle parked close to my father's repair shop. Every photograph carried a different date, different location, different time. The same vehicle. I looked at him in disbelief. You've been tracking this? I've been tracking whoever is inside it. Why? His answer came immediately. Because I think the person who took your father is watching you. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Everything suddenly felt larger than I had imagined. This was no longer just a missing person case. Someone was actively monitoring my life. As we stood in the parking lot, another question finally forced its way out. Why are you doing this? Adrian looked away. The silence lasted so long that I almost repeated the question. Then he answered, because this started with me, my heart stopped. What does that mean? His eyes met mine. For the first time since I met him, there was no distance, no caution, and no attempt to protect me from the truth. Only regret. When I first walked into that library, he said quietly, it wasn't an accident. The world seemed to freeze around me. I already knew exactly who you were. And in that moment, I realized the man I had fallen in love with had entered my life carrying a secret that connected him to my father long before we ever met. For several seconds, I could not speak. The parking lot around us seemed to disappear as Adrian's words repeated inside my head. When I first walked into that library, it wasn't an accident. I already knew exactly who you were. Every memory from the past 6 months suddenly felt uncertain. The day we met, the conversations, the coffee shop, the growing trust between us. I stared at him and wondered how much of it had been real. Start talking, I said quietly. Adrian nodded. I owe you that. We drove to a small diner outside town because neither of us wanted to continue the conversation in public. Once we were seated, Adrian finally told me the truth he had been hiding. 20 years earlier, his father and mine had worked with Nathan Reed in the same business. I immediately remembered Nathan's name appearing in old comscouserations. But Adrian's next words changed everything. Growing up, he had always believed that my father was responsible for destroying his family's life. His father spent years blaming Robert Parker for a business collapse that left them struggling financially. By the time Adrian became an adult, that story had become part of his identity. I wanted answers, he admitted. So you used me? The question came out sharper than I intended. His expression tightened. At first, I wanted information. That's the truth. Hearing those words hurt more than I expected. For months, I had trusted him. For months, I had believed our relationship began naturally. Now, I was learning that I had unknowingly become part of someone else's investigation. Adrian looked directly at me, but everything changed once I started looking deeper. I remained silent, he continued. The more he investigated, the more he realized the story he had grown up believing was incomplete. Financial records, court documents, and witness statements all pointed toward one person, Nathan Reed. Nathan had manipulated both families. He stole money, destroyed the business, blamed everyone except himself. Then he spent years encouraging resentment between people who should never have been enemies. The truth had shocked Adrian so much that he eventually shared his findings with my father. That was why the secret meetings happened. That was why my father had suddenly become worried. And that was why someone wanted him gone. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The pain I felt was complicated. Part of me was angry. Part of me was relieved. Part of me wanted to leave immediately. Yet another part recognized something important. Adrian could have continued lying. Instead, he chose honesty, even though it might cost him everything. I wanted to believe Adrian, but every answer he gave seemed to create 2 new questions. Once damaged, it rarely returns overnight. Sometimes rebuilding it requires uncomfortable truths, accountability, and time. Before either of us could continue, Adrian's phone rang. The moment he answered, his expression changed. He stood up immediately. What happened? I asked. He ended the call. The vehicle we've been tracking was just spotted near an abandoned industrial property outside town. My heartbeat accelerated. The same property connected to Nathan. The same area police had been investigating. A terrible feeling settled inside me. Minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. For several seconds, there was only static. Then I heard my father's voice. His voice sounded weak and exhausted, as though he had not slept properly for days. Elena. The call ended. My chair nearly fell backward as I stood. He's there. Adrian already knew. We rushed toward the parking lot. The police had been notified, but waiting felt impossible. Every minute mattered. The industrial property looked even worse at night than it did in photographs. Rusted buildings stretched across empty ground, and broken windows reflected the headlights of our cars. We moved carefully through the darkness. Then we heard it. A voice. My father's voice. The sound came from a warehouse near the back of the property. I ran toward it. Inside, I found him tied to a chair. His face looked exhausted, but he was alive. Relief hit me so hard that tears filled my eyes. Dad. Before I could reach him, another voice echoed through the warehouse. Family reunions are emotional things. Nathan Reed stepped out from behind a row of metal shelves. For the first time in my life, I saw the man behind the mask. The friendly smiles was gone. The comforting voice was gone. Only bitterness remained. Nathan began talking about betrayal and revenge. He blamed my father for everything that happened to him. He blamed Adrian's family. He blamed former business partners. He blamed anyone except himself. Some people become so attached to their anger that they stop recognizing reality. They rewrite every memory until they become the victim of every story. Nathan had spent 20 years doing exactly that. Then he looked at Adrian. Tell her the rest. The warehouse became silent. Nathan smiled. He hasn't told you everything. I looked at Adrian. A painful expression crossed his face. I came into your life because I thought your father ruined mine, he admitted. Nathan laughed. There it is. The truth hurt. Even though I already suspected it, hearing the words aloud felt different. But something else mattered more. Adrian had stayed. He had uncovered the truth. He had protected me. And he was standing beside my family, instead of the man who shared his history. Moments later, police sirens filled the night. Nathan attempted to escape, but was quickly surrounded. This time there was nowhere left to run. Several months later, life finally felt normal again. My father returned to work. The investigation ended. The lies that had poisoned 2 families for decades finally came to light. One evening, the 3 of us sat outside the repair shop, watching the sunset. My father looked at Adrian for a long moment. Then he smiled. When I first met you, I thought you were the danger. Adrian laughed softly. I know. My father shook his head. The strange thing is that you spent all this time protecting us. I looked at the man sitting beside me. He was imperfect. He had made mistakes. He had entered my life for the wrong reasons. Yet when the truth appeared, he chose it over resentment. Looking back, I realized that real character is not revealed when everything is easy. It appears when people are forced to choose between what is convenient and what is right. The first time Adrian entered my life, he was searching for the man he believed had destroyed his family. The last time he stood beside us, he was protecting the family he helped save, and that is why, whenever I think about those difficult months, I remember him as the silent guardian. If you enjoyed this story, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional English stories.